Hello and welcome to Deep in Pact, a proud member of the Duff Network where we dive deep into our both's most diabolical work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
And we are back to talk about Conviction 5.4. So we have skipped forward a few minutes and Blake, Rose and Evan are all kind of performing the binding ritual to bind Blake and Evan together, but, you know, Rose is there helping too, playing a bit of the third wheel in this relationship.
Yeah, well, she's kind of helping Evan get through it because he's obviously still a kid, so he struggles with some bits of it. But, yeah, and I mean, we see later that she's very much a part of this, so, yeah, you know, it's good that she got to get involved, I guess.
Yay!
In some part of it. But I like how this sort of... One of the first things we see in this part of the ritual is Blake winging it and changing the words. It was very Blake. Like it didn't surprise me at all when it was suddenly like, oh yeah, Blake's just editing this as he goes. Checks out
freestyle off the top of the dome.
He also uses soap. I guess he was meant to create a circle of something that represents human civilization. So he used soap, which I mean, that actually makes sense to me. He seems a little critical of himself for it, but I mean, I back it.
Yeah, well, it's one of the most important inventions is hygiene, right? Medically speaking.
Yeah, it was a bit of a turning point for, like hygiene and a lot of sort of medical stuff. Absolutely.
So this is another example of something I love about Pact, which is a wild ritual that, so we've seen a few rituals throughout the story so far. We've seen the Awakening ritual, we've seen the Chronomancy ritual, and now this one. And they're all very, like, weighty. They all have these, like, you know, they're reading these passages aloud to the spirits, presumably, and there's always weird shit that starts to happen. It really gives these rituals a feeling of, like, you know, some weight, some oomph behind them.
Yeah, they're not just casual spells. These are like the big bits. And I mean, because like Blake actually sort of notices that he, the very opening line of the chapter is that he's 3/4 of the way through this thing and no weird shit's happening, and he actually finds that odd. He then points out that he's already halfway like through the spirit world or whatever, so there's already tons of weird shit happening, so maybe it's kind of being lost in that regard. But,
and then the more weird shit does start happening anyway. So
it does come,
jump the gun a bit. Yeah. So there's a line here I want to pull out, because we didn't really talk about it last chapter, which was Blake is referring to Duncan and says, I turned his promise into a lie, and that came at a cost. You know, Blake has made Duncan break his promise, because Blake did escape from the police station, at least for a minute or two. You know, Duncan kind of said earlier, he implied that he has made promises to Laird about keeping Blake at the police station. He made an implicit promise to Blake that he would keep them there for 24 hours for the day. And so Blake is kind of like counting on Duncan being a bit powered down now that his promise has been fucked with.
Yeah, I toyed with the idea of bringing this last time, since that wasn't really my read when I went through that Duncan was forsworn in any way, but it was definitely a thing in the comments. Like when we went to pull out comments for 5.3, there were multiple discussions of people arguing for both ways, whether or not Duncan was forsworn and whether he'd actually promised anything, or, you know, whether the exact semantics meant that it was a promise or not. And we sort of learned it's kind of somewhere in the middle. Like he clearly did make those promises and he was forsworn, but Blake fucked himself up so much that the spirits aren't even sure whether they count it. So they've kind of half forsworn him, it seems like. The spirit's like, I don't know, just take a half, like, shit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Blake is about 50% himself, so Duncan gets about 50% powered down. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
So Evan and Blake finish their ritual, kind of, you know, swearing more promises to each other, and they get bound together. And almost immediately this helps Blake out. Like, he almost immediately feels better as a result of this.
Yeah, well, because I started to get a little worried, because as they're going through the ritual, there's this bit where Blake promises to feed Evan however he needs it, and Evan promises to, like, repay him for that, and then Blake sort of has a quick thought aside where he's like, you know, there was a whole chapter in the book dedicated to basically this one part of the ritual, because depending on the other, and the familiar practitioner relationship, like it totally changes what that looks like. Like sometimes it can be the practitioner gives the familiar their own power, and then the familiar sort of uses that to do cool shit for the practitioner, basically.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that the other gives you personal power. And I was like, as that sort of became clear to me, I was like, oh God, I mean, Blake's got to get some power from Evan, though, right? Like, Jesus, this has gone on for too long. He
doesn't need another drain.
Yeah, exactly. He's already got Rose tanking him on one end. The last thing he needs is Evan taking some stuff too. So it does seem to be that, in general, at least, Evan is feeding him some power, which we've said souls are different to ghosts. So I assume that means it's all okay, and he's not, going to run out in 6 months.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can imagine, we know ghosts are pretty fragile, so you can imagine if Evan was a ghost instead of a soul, maybe he would need more power from Blake to hold himself together, but I guess souls don't have that limitation. Evan is immediately helpful to Blake. We kind of learn one of his abilities is going to be able to be, unlocking locks, just helping Blake maneuver through tricky situations.
Yeah, he seems to have this ability to just peck locks open, which is great. When I first was reading it, I was like, did he just pick that lock with his beak? I don't really understand the logistics of that. And then later it's like, no, he just pecks them and they just come undone, which is cooler.
Yeah. We're in a world with magic, Elliot. He doesn't literally have to open it with his beak. So beak, of course, we find out Evan is a bird. He's got a beak and claws. He's a cute little bird boy, which is a good fit, and we'll talk about that a bit later, I think.
Yep.
As Blake is kind of escaping out of a window, unfortunately, Duncan catches up to him, pulls a gun on him, and says, "You move, I'll shoot you. So come back inside."
Yeah. So there's a couple of bits I want to talk about right here. So I'll this bit where Duncan's sort of like, "I'm going to keep you in here because it's going to raise questions about what you're even doing in here," and Blake retorts, "Well, what you did to the door," because Duncan sort of aged the door so that it fell apart.
Yep.
And Blake's like, yeah, well, that's going to raise questions too. And then as he's sort of turned around, he sees the door's just repairing itself. And you can just imagine how smug Duncan's looking about that specific thing. But It also just made me think how frustrating it must be for like other practitioners to fight Blake, because he's, in terms of being a practitioner, he's such a dumbass. Like, really.
He's clueless.
And so it's like, he's so ignorant, and it must be so frustrating if he keeps beating you when he doesn't even really know what he's doing. It also makes him incredibly unpredictable, as Duncan sort of goes into in a little bit. But aside from just the unpredictability, it's very frustrating being beaten by a novice at something that you've been training at for most of your life.
Yes, and we see that frustration in Duncan kind of seeming to go more and more off of the rails, right? You genuinely get the sense that Duncan is pretty close to just shooting him right then and there.
Duncan's phrasing in a lot of this almost implies specifically that he's going to shoot Blake. Like, there's not much of that, well, if you don't do this, maybe I'll shoot. He's kind of like, if you don't start talking, I will shoot you. So, he's clearly, on edge and not messing around anymore.
Yeah, leaving no wiggle room here.
Yeah, absolutely. He can't help but give Blake a little bit of a monologue about why cutting himself open like this was a bad thing, and because he sort of tells Blake about how now stuff can get in and possess him, and that's sort of a whole thing that Blake starts to worry about towards the end of the chapter. But like, there was no need for Duncan to tell Blake this. Like, this is clearly just that smugness coming through. He just loves being able to tell Blake what an idiot he is, so he takes the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, of course. It's his special move. I like Duncan. He's very smug here, pointing out why Blake's unpredictable weird moves were also the incorrect moves to make. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what we were talking about before. Like, this is why it would be so frustrating, because you wouldn't predict Blake would do something this dumb, because apparently it's really dumb.
Who would have thought bleeding yourself out is a bad idea? Anyway, more police officers come into the morgue, and Duncan has really got Blake into a corner here. Blake is caught in the morgue with the same child's body, doing some kind of weird ritual, and it doesn't look good for old Blake.
Yeah, again, the making Blake look crazy angle seems like a very slam dunk strategy.
Barely even needed to do anything.
Yeah, they walked in and Blake's just like been throwing soap around the room with this child's body in it. So yeah, pretty easy case to make, I think.
Yeah, and the fact that Duncan seems like there's been a struggle, and Duncan is kind of telling them, hey, Duncan is threatening to tell them, hey, I was afraid for my life at one point, it doesn't get the police officers on side.
No, well, yeah, as Blake says, there's no quicker way to turn the rest of the police against you than hurting one of their own.
Yeah. Interestingly, though, Duncan does seem to go a bit easy on him. He could kind of say, "Oh, Blake drew a weapon on me." He could literally shoot Blake. I mean, he would be able to find a way to justify doing that, right? But instead, he tells them to go a bit easy on him, and it's I don't know. I wonder what you think of his motivation here.
Yeah, it jumped out to me as well. He explicitly says go easy on him, and I was like, why? I don't really know. I think maybe it's a karma thing. Maybe because he's low on power, there's some reason that he, wants Blake kept in some way, or to maybe drain power from Blake, which is like talk about tapping a dry well, or something. But yeah, it definitely jumped out to me, and I'm still not super confident in any read on why exactly he said this. And because Blake has brought this up before, actually, I think last chapter. He mentioned that both Duncan and Laird have gone out of their way not to directly hurt him, which is interesting. Maybe it was part of whatever deal. I've talked before about how they probably made a deal with Rose Senior to get some defenses. Maybe they're actually not allowed to directly act on him or something.
Yeah, it seems like the kind of thing that could happen, right? Like you don't go after me or mine kind of clause in the deal.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why but it wasn't indirect stuff, so that's why they're always sending middlemen or just sort of indirectly messing with him, putting him in bad situations, but not pulling the trigger.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it would make sense. It would track all the way back to Laird's tricks in the coffee shop, right?
Yeah, totally.
So Evan, who has been undetected by Duncan so far, kind of sneaks behind him and, in his bird form, kind of gets inside his coat, rustling around inside Duncan's coat for a purpose that we don't really find out what it is until later. But Duncan quite quickly catches him and grabs him.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think Duncan played this pretty coolly. Like, if I had a sparrow going through my coat, I'd be freaking the hell out. I'd be screaming, pulling off my coat, probably on the ground. Duncan just sort of grabs it and handles it. It's actually kind of impressive.
Yep, fine with it. And Duncan, obviously from this, sees, Evan sees what has happened and seems, I don't know, like disappointed in Blake that he's done this.
So I am a little bit confused by all this because I don't think that Duncan fully appreciates that Evan is now his familiar at this point in time, because otherwise breaking his neck was never going to really do that much. I guess it still does a lot, but he does sort of have this reaction where he seems very displeased by the revelation that Evan is now a bird, which I don't know. Maybe he does realize it's the familiar, and he's upset that he's going to have to sort of fight Evan now as well, because he does seem like someone who genuinely wouldn't have anything against Evan, and so it would kind of suck to find out, oh, now I'm going to have to destroy this 8-year-old boy's soul, literally. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
I guess it's a bit of a move in poor taste, forcing your opponent to have to kill an 8-year-old boy. But Duncan, ever the workhorse, does it. Takes a solid hold on Bird Evan and snaps his neck, tossing him outside in the snow. Wow, brutal.
Yeah, it's pretty full on. You really feel it when it happens.
You hear the crunch, don't you?
Yeah, you really do. I like this bit as they're sort of marching out, and Blake's desperately trying to prevent this. So this is just before Duncan goes outside and twists the neck.
Yep.
He sort of goes. Blake sort of tries to bring up. He's like, this is Laird's nephew. Like, I'm bringing this up for the third time, and it's like that desperate attempt to do the theatrics again. And this time it doesn't work. But I really appreciated the effort and the way the text sort of highlights exactly what Blake's trying to do. Like, we never hear his thoughts or anything on this. It's just the term third time is italicized, and you're immediately like, oh yeah, good idea.
Good try, Blake. Good try. Yeah, it doesn't work. And Duncan snaps Evan's neck, and all of the strength that Blake had kind of been given by Evan here is gone, and he basically collapses. He basically almost falls right through the floor into, the other world right then and there.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty rough. It seems like what happened to him, when presumably the Knights of the Basement sort of tugged on his very essence when they were forming a connection with him, but like 1,000 times worse. Like he feels like he's disintegrating, basically.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't sound pleasant.
It was a good 5 minutes where he had a new source of power, but
not even 5 minutes, I don't think. So there's a quote where, I'm interested to hear how you reacted to this. We get this quote: Evan was lying in a snowbank with a snapped neck until he pulled himself together. And to me, this was the moment where it kind of, it's like, hey, Evan's dead. Oh, nope. He's a familiar now, so it's okay. He can pull himself back together. I'm curious how this affected you.
I didn't really believe that Evan was gone at any point. I think we've had it really hammered into us that familiars are a whole life thing, and there's no divorce or anything. And I even assumed that kind of meant there's no widowing, or at the very least, there's no, if your familiar died, you don't get a new one. And I really felt like it'd be. I would have been really angry at Wildbow if we'd gone through all of this and then Evan had died and Blake was just familiarless for the rest of the story.
We finally get him as a familiar, and no, never mind.
Yeah, that might have been a bit much for me. So I never really fully believed it, so I was glad that it didn't really feel dragged out, though, this concept that, like, oh, Evan's dead, and I did believe that Blake might believe it, so that sort of kept the impact of the whole situation a bit alive to me. But, the line you read did jump out to me as well, because Blake is just sort of like, the term "until he pulled himself together" kind of makes it seem like he's just being a bit slack, but he's lying there with a broken neck, like...
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
I think it means pull himself together in the sense of like
literally
the Terminator pulling itself back together.
Yeah.
I mean, presumably.
Like literally reforming yourself, not just like, that slacker on the couch who needs to get their life together and get off
back
the couch.
In shape, Evan. Yeah. So Blake kind of has this realization that while Duncan was in the evidence locker before, he wasn't just collecting trinkets. He wasn't just kind of, poking around. He was collecting things that were Blake's to kind of deny Blake the opportunity to slip back in and get them now that he's escaped. Which means that Duncan now has June on him, and so Rose is able to summon June and fucking deep freeze Duncan, or try to at least.
Yeah, I mean, Blake's already experienced firsthand how having Rose on your person is both a blessing and a curse, depending on how things go. But yeah, I like the way we've sort of had this seeded to us. Evan has been trying to get this message to Blake, and it sort of finally clicks.
Yeah.
And I also like that this wasn't actually Blake's plan for Rose to use June. He seemed to have some idea that actually involved opening the doors, which I don't understand what his genuine plan was. Rose's seems much better. But it's interesting that Blake's idea of... Because it was to do with June, but he wanted to open the cold air for some reason, maybe to make it easier for a June, whereas Rose just instantly goes to, how can I use the magical hatchet that's a tool?
As a tool. Yeah. So June starts freezing Duncan, and the image of Duncan, he has to suddenly make an excuse and run away while June is starting to freeze him. It's just such a funny image. He's like, I'll leave you to it, I gotta go. And he just kind of runs off.
It's very funny. It's like when someone gets diarrhea in a sitcom or something, and they've got that panicked look on their face, and they're like, I have to go to the evidence room, and then they sort of quickly waddle off awkwardly. That's exactly what I was sort of picturing in this situation.
Yeah, it's a great moment. And so this kind of gives an opportunity for some more shenanigans, right? Rose breaks a window, causes some shenanigans, heads out, and convinces Evan that he's not really dead. Evan pulls himself back together, flies in, and kind of reveals that Duncan's jacket, where he's dropped it, has a bag of evidence inside it.
Yeah. And so again, Blake sort of says Rose just goes out there and Blake doesn't say exactly what she said, but he sort of implies that it's something along the lines of convincing Evan that it's just a broken neck, which again, I have to call out as seemingly belittling what I would imagine is a very traumatic experience, regardless of your current status in terms of being a familiar or whatever. Like, it's probably very uncomfortable for Evan.
No, come on, Evan. Man up. You just have your neck snapped, buddy. Come on. No, yeah, it's... I don't know what... the wording of convincing Evan that he's not really dead is so funny to me.
Yeah, like it really had me wondering what is Evan going through right now as he's lying there, like, because we've seen ghosts, like just regular ghosts like June, sort of being able to be convinced that they're reliving their deaths, and I wonder if Evan experiences something similar, and this was just like a really traumatic little bit for him that Blake and Rose are like, come on, get back to work.
Yeah, no time for a nap in the snow, Evan. So yeah, Evan kind of comes in and reveals the evidence, and Blake uses this to kind of point out, hey, what the heck, Duncan's got evidence, there's some conspiracy going on, and you know, it all kind of comes together quite nicely because of Blake and Evan and Rose all kind of working together, right? Blake reveals the info about the hatchet, Rose runs with that, sets up Evan flies in, sets up Blake, and they all kind of play off each other really, really well and really naturally here. They have good team dynamics. Yeah,
totally. They're all very in sync with this little maneuver. It comes together really nicely, and I can only hope they maintain this level of teamwork for at least most of the story.
We'll see. So Duncan is kind of, Duncan goes wild again. He basically sets up to reset the day. He draws his gun and tries to shoot Blake. Evan helps him get out of the way by kind of pushing him. And Duncan locks himself into a room to kind of reset the day. Blake will have his third chance, I suppose.
Yeah, which he doesn't really want anymore, I don't think, or because he didn't want it and then he did, and now I think he's probably back to not wanting it, because especially Duncan confirmed that if he resets the day, Blake is still kind of like fucked in terms of...
Blake is still going to be drained.
Yeah, so there's not really any advantage for Blake in resetting the day anymore. Like, that was my hope, is he'd get Duncan to reset the day and he'd be back to his old self, but with a familiar, but I guess not. I like this little thing that sort of comes up a bit. So Evan seems to have like an Ant-Man-esque power where even though he's a little sparrow, he can sort of hit things with more force than that. Because it makes more sense than Ant-Man, because this is magic, so the physics inconsistencies are like appropriate. But it's a cool little twist. Like, we're learning all these little abilities Evan has that I'm sure are going to be very useful throughout the rest of the story. Yeah,
definitely. This chapter really sets up how great of a like multi-tool Evan is able to be in a lot of these situations.
Yeah, totally.
So Duncan snaps again here, right? And this is something I really like about his character, is he almost to a level of being kind of sociopathic is able to just kind of realize, oh, this day is a write-off. Well, time to go Westworld and fuck shit up and reset the day. He just completely switches off or switches over to a different mode of like going cold. It's very brutal.
Yeah, well, it's someone who's not concerned at all about consequences or anything. I mean, not the best comparison, but this is like in a video game, where you sort of you save your game and then you go on a rampage, knowing you can go back to the previous save, right? Like, that's basically what he's doing here. Like, he probably doesn't think he has to worry about not being a complete psychopath, because in the end he's going to correct everything, so it shouldn't matter.
Yep. So Blake is taken back to his cell and kind of waits for the day to reset. Whenever Evan delivers him the locket that was taken from him before, as well as a mysterious item that Blake doesn't identify, but clearly seems to put Blake at ease.
And so the hair is gone from the locket, but Blake notices some like rust or something in there that he thinks might be the glamour, maybe. So I guess he treats the locket like he did before, and I guess he's hoping that when he's got a bit more of a chance, he can have a look inside and see if there's anything worth, keeping.
Yeah, maybe he can, regrow it, start it up again.
Yeah.
I like that we don't find out what this thing that Evan has delivered is, but Blake is so at ease by it. And he goes from, okay, I need to plan for the third round to, all right, we got this, it's fine. Let's start worrying about the abstract demon. This is easy. It's so fun. Like, what could Evan have grabbed that would set this up? It's a great little paragraph or two of just being confused why everything has suddenly just gone well.
Yeah, and you can sort of try and draw your own conclusions as you're reading, and it's not dragged out too long, so it's not like a super unnecessary little dramatic moment. But yeah, basically, you're right. There's this tonal shift for this prison cell conversation where as soon as this object is revealed, Blake can go back to focusing on all of his other concerns now that he knows he will be out of here soon.
Yeah. He can go back to just having to worry about the massive monster that's trying to send him after a demon that eats people and makes them disappear. Good times.
Oh, and also that he's probably possessed by something at this point, and he's about to get real sick from it.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a moment here where Rose says, if you can't go over after the abstract demon, that's okay, isn't it? You only promised you'd try to bind the three things. Emphasizing that you only promised you'd try to bind the three things. So Blake is kind of making the point that Rose is kind of making the point, that Blake has already tried here, but Blake really wants to give it a proper go, right?
Yeah, a great point to make after he's already destroyed himself getting two of them, Rose. But no, you're right. His counter argument is essentially on the lines of, no, I want to do this.
Yeah.
Not even because I mean the counter argument to I do want to do this is, yeah, but give it a real go in like a week when you're not absolutely fucked.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, Blake has to, give it an actual try. He pulls out some justifications about promising Evan that they'd, deal with the bad things, but you're right. There's no inherent time limit on that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But Blake is kind of calm enough to take a quick nap, until he's kind of woken up by Duncan storming towards him, and we find out that the mysterious object that Evan took from him was one of the items that Duncan needs for time, looping.
Yeah, and particularly because Duncan has been weakened somewhat by Blake escaping, he really needs all of them. So yeah, he's shit out of luck.
That's pretty much it. Like, Duncan's screwed from there, right? He's snapped. He showed the psychopath side, and he can't reset. The moment to me that's beautiful is Duncan storming towards them, and his partner saying something along the lines of, "Come on now, Duncan, you're not making things any better for yourself," which is just such a you just know in that moment Duncan's lost this.
Yeah, absolutely. He's gone from, as I was sort of saying, doing all this shit where he didn't have to worry about the consequences to having that dawning realization where, the autosave was actually on and now he can't go back and he's stuck with, having killed all those people in Skyrim and he can't go back now.
He's Westworlded, but turns out the robots are sentient. Uh-oh. So Blake's lawyer comes back and, Blake is very close to being released. Blake threatens to go to the media, and basically, based on that, the captain says, okay, yeah, I'll let you go. Although, you gotta come back for questioning tomorrow morning.
Which Blake says he'll do, and
yeah,
maybe this is just me being paranoid, but as he was agreeing to that, I was like, oh, I wouldn't use such harsh words. Because, it is in Blake's interest to come back and help sort this out, to really close out his defeat of Duncan and hopefully then by extension Laird, because that is important. But promising he'll be back tomorrow morning with the night he's looking to have ahead of him,
yes,
might have been a bit optimistic.
I think it's probably worth pointing out that if he can't come back tomorrow morning, that means the night tonight where Pose is unbound and where Blake is fighting the abstract demon. If Blake can't come back tomorrow morning, he's got bigger problems, I think. Yeah,
exactly. So, I would have very much been like, along the lines of, yes, I'm definitely planning to come back.
I'll do my best.
It's in my interest to come back, but I would have avoided making hard promises along a certain timeline because, that seems very optimistic.
Yeah, for sure. There's a line, so they're thinking about the possession stuff, and I want to pull out this line. just because I felt it was very foreboding, where Blake is thinking it was phase 1 of the possession process. I'd read about what happened when too big a spirit took up residence. So this has to be a reference to Vic, way back in our very first interlude, which is possibly the worst case of thing that you could be compared to by being inhabited by a spirit, right? That went pretty badly.
Yeah, I mean, Vic was my first thought as well, because it's certainly the only example like that we've read. So it probably is a reference to Vic because it's the only one we can draw. But yeah, you're right. Yeah. I mean, Vic didn't have a good time of it. So although in saying that, they did manage to kind of keep it under control through a familiar bond. So Evan might be helping out there, I guess. Hopefully,
true. True.
But
well,
if we weren't,
Blake is inhabited by a spirit.
Yeah. Well, if we found out that Blake for the whole of this story has already been possessed by a spirit of like being a maniac, I wouldn't be very surprised.
Yeah. But it's free. Blake's free, and now all he has to do is go fight the scary memory demon, which is better. I mean, again, out of the frying pan, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I actually wondered briefly towards the end, as we were closing on Arc 4. Originally, I thought Arc 4 was going to be all 3 challenges, and I don't think it was quite till 4.11 that I understood that wasn't going to be the case. But there was a period there where I started to wonder if there was going to be just like a bit of a trick to the abstract demon. Like it's not going to be quite as epically evil as we think. I think there was a line where Blake said to Fel that he thought it was going to be the worst one, and Fel basically responds maybe, which could just be practitioner talk for I don't want to commit to anything. But I'm wondering if there is maybe not as much to the abstract demon, or it's going to be more of like a mental thing to bit. I think these last two have been physical and emotional challenges for Blake, and I wonder if this abstract demon is actually just going to be something where it's just a bit of a you just got to kind of outplay it mentally.
Interesting.
Some sort of equivalent of beating it in a chess game type thing, but obviously nothing that simple. But nothing quite like chasing a giant wolf goblin through a forest.
Are you basing this based on the fact that like you can see how many chapters are in Conviction, and there's a bit of the arc is going to come to an end soon, or?
Honestly, yeah, a little bit. But also mostly just Blake is so physically defeated already. I just don't think.
True.
I think I'm more interested in the idea of the story taking a slightly different route in how it's challenging Blake, because it'd kind of be like beating a dead horse a bit to require him to physically go through more. Not that I wouldn't necessarily enjoy that, but I like the idea of it just being some sort of mental challenge that he Rose and Evan go up against, and that seems to be Blake's hope as well, based on how the chapter ends.
Well, yeah, no, I imagine Blake is keen for it, not another physical challenge. But I suppose we'll find out next time in Conviction 5.5, because that's the end of 5.4 right there.
Yeah, and so this is just, as we end the chapter, this is just a bit of a reminder that we asked that discussion question, and we said we'd talk about it at the end of 5.4, but we forgot that that's a bonus one, so that's actually not a whole week. Yep. So we're going to do it.
Give people a bit more time.
Yeah, well, in saying that, because of Easter, our recording schedule is getting a bit sort of shifted around, so we're actually going to be recording 5.5 around the time 5.4 comes out. So we will only be pulling answers from 5.2 and 5.3's threads. So as you're hearing this, we've probably already sort of started recording that.
Too late.
But
so,
we will be reading. Yeah, we will be reading them next chapter. For now, though, we thought it'd be more fun to do a little monster corner. Seems like the wrong word, but we're going to talk about the meaning
harsh.
of the meaning of sparrows and Evan's new familiar form.
Yeah, I always love the idea of what determines the form that a familiar takes. So, now that we finally get to meet Blake's familiar, the protagonist's familiar, what forms does it take? A sparrow. What does that mean, Elliot?
Yeah, well, I actually thought it was interesting. I assumed this would be something that was maybe a discussion or something the familiar sort of chose, but I kind of got the impression that Evan just turned into that. Like, it didn't really seem like something he chose to do. Either he's a very clever little boy, because this is a great form, or it just sort of happens, like the spirits maybe are what decides the form of the familiar a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, so Evan has taken the form of a sparrow, I presume. But technically, we just hear bird, or I think there's one point where Blake specifically calls it a sparrow, and I've latched onto that because it fits really well. So if that's not if that's not what he was, if that's not what he was implying with that statement, it should be, because it fits fantastically. So when I first went to look into like the symbolism of sparrows, I mostly came across what they mean in terms of totem animals, which I hadn't heard before, and it's a Native American thing. There's some tarot stuff that also deals with like totem animals, but it kind of seems like they've just cannibalized the Native American concepts and integrated it into a deck of cards.
Yeah.
So the general gist of the actual Native American stuff seems to be that you have these spirit animals or these totem animals that are with you for a few years. Like, it's not like a zodiac where it's your whole life and it's based on your birth, but it's more like based on the period of your life that you're going through right now. You sort of have a totem animal that you're meant to sort of follow, and it guides you through that phase of your life.
Yeah.
And
cool.
So sparrows are talked about a bit in a lot of this stuff, and there are a few trends I sort of noticed in the various, websites talking about this sort of stuff. The biggest one was that they usually focused on like cooperation and teamwork and friendship and all that sort of stuff, which, very much suits what we saw this chapter and just the general relationship between Blake and Evan, I think.
Well, yeah, and Rose being in there too, I guess.
Yeah, you're right. It's cooperation and the sort of community aspect comes in when this particular familiar practitioner relationship has an extra familiar. Yeah, an extra person in it than most of them probably do.
Yeah.
I think the other biggest trend that I noticed was that sparrows are generally associated with this idea that you need to work on your own self-worth or believe in yourself more. You're probably someone who's a bit underconfident if your current spirit animal is a sparrow, which
I like
suits
that.
Blake
it
and
fits
Evan
so well. Yeah.
Yeah, it suits both of them a fair bit. Probably Rose too, even. But I quite like that. Another little fun one was that they're often quite small and they're underestimated because of it, but they're actually quite powerful. Again, I think that suits Evan and Blake quite well. And quite literally, we have multiple points where Evan is noted for being like a lot stronger and more powerful than a sparrow should be. So it's a bit of a literal interpretation of that. And the last one I wanted to note, just as a bit of a funny point, is sparrows often can imply that you have a poor work-life balance at the time when they're your spirit animal, and that maybe you're working yourself too much or not enough, and you need to either take some time or stop procrastinating, which, Blake could use some more R&R. That is true.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know if you would call fighting for your life his work, but definitely he doesn't have a great life balance in there.
Yeah, well, he's made a bit of a career of just trying to stay alive. Yeah. So I don't know. I just thought that was a funny little comment on Blake's current situation. And then obviously the last thing I just wanted to say, and this didn't really come from the research, but obviously a sparrow's a bird. And in general, those are quite like free and agile. Like, you often associate birds with freedom of movement and speed. Yeah. And I think that fits Evan in particular. He was a little quick mover. And then also, Blake is someone who's constantly going on about how he wants to keep moving and he wants to, not be tied down. And so I think that suits both of them quite well in that regard as well.
Yeah, I mean, that the association with birds and movement, and also obviously Blake's tattoos are the really obvious ones that I kind of, that you put together when you're reading the text. But it's interesting to hear that there are all these other bits of symbolism that really fit their relationship and who Blake is and who Evan is so well. There's a lot more layers to it than you initially think.
Yeah, totally. Because I think a lot of people probably make those general connections to birds, but it was interesting reading about sparrows in particular and seeing that this was a more deliberate choice than just a general bird, but even
just he's got a bird tattoo, let's make it a bird.
Yeah, even having Evan be specifically a sparrow seems to have been something that had some thought put into it, and it's really good.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's the end of our episode today. Thanks you all for joining us, and if you want to pop your answers to our discussion question somewhere, you can put them into the discussion thread. We will still read them, of course, just they won't be featured on the episode. Or you can talk about anything that you want to chat about from chapter 5.4 in those discussion threads. That will be linked in the episode description down below.
Yes, and if you're keen to hear more people talk about Wildbow stuff, you can head to doofmedia.com and see all the other shows there. And of course, I'm specifically talking about We've Got Ward at the moment, which is just hit part 2 of Arc 13. And
yes,
Arc 13's very, very intriguing right now.
Oh yeah, it's really getting very interesting. I don't want to talk about it too much in case people have not listened or caught up on Ward, but definitely you should, because this arc is getting wild.
Yes.
And if you want to show your support for the Doof Network, the Doof Media Network is supported by its patrons, so the fact that we have patrons is what allows us to do this show and to upgrade our server hosting and all that cool stuff. If you would like to help support the show, please go to patreon.com/doofmedia. It would be very appreciated, genuinely.
Absolutely. And what we're talking about, donating money to people who are putting their time into stuff. We can't forget Wildbow, who puts so much time into all these amazing stories and really deserves some reward for how great they are. So please stop by his Patreon, patreon.com/Wildbow.
Yeah, definitely. For more news on Deep in Pact and our shows, you can also check out our Twitter, which is @MediaMDPodcast. Yeah.
Apart from that, we'll see everyone on Friday the 19th of April for Chapter 5.5.
We'll see you then.